Hello, Instagram family. I'm here for another IG Live, Sensual Sovereignty Burn the Box with the very beautiful Kerry Sutra. And I'm going to share a little of her intro before getting her on. Here she is. So, dubbed the sexy activist, she indeed is the sexy activist. Kerry touches it all, YouTuber and co-host of Medicine for Resistance, a revolutionary podcast that is making a difference by lending a voice of disruption to the colonial narrative. So much needed. Kerry wraps it up in a sensual package. Mother, Glamour, and now Vita certified sensuality coach. Kerry is passionate about creating healing spaces for the racialized majority and queer folk. So needed. Kerry uses her lived experience from her time in the adult industry, her training in neurorehabilitation with the Brain Injury Association of Ontario, and her deep dive into the spiritual as a trained sacred leader to provide trauma-informed support to her community. So that's her intro. I want to say also that I've known Kerry for over 3 years now. And on our first call that we had, when she introduced herself as Glamour, that was it. She had me from that point. And I also want to mention that we will be diving into what it means as melanated beings to step into our central power, our divine sacredness, our divine sexiness, our goddess energy. And these are all Kerry's words. I used it to promote this, but this is what came from her, and I'm so excited, so resonant with all of those words. So let's bring Kerry on so we can have this discussion, this conversation. Hello!
Hello!
It's so good to be here with you.
Isn't it though? Isn't it though? I am like ecstatic that we get to share this space and time together and do this work together. I heard the intro and it feels so amazing to have it come out of your mouth in particular. I have to share with some of the folks that are on, and I see that a few of my sisters have also come on. I'm seeing that a few people I know, Dana, hello, you've joined the chat. I see you, Jyoti, hello, you have joined the chat. I'm just in this space and loving you because you are really a pivotal point, Sonali, as to how and why I did and do this work. Sonali was my community guardian. Actually, not community guardian, was my sister when I was running through my certification for Vita and learning this work in depth. And Sonali was always a gentle and incredible voice of wisdom that was just always ready to hear as we process through. So there's something so full circle for me being in this space with you right now and honoring you in this conversation today.
Oh,
Truly.
thank you for that. And I feel the same. I can hardly believe. I was thinking of the years. It's like maybe 3.5 years at this point.
Right?
Since we first connected, and you said Glamour. I'm Glamour. I'm like, oh yes, we need that. We need more of that energy.
Absolutely.
That in our vocabulary. You know?
Well, it's important, right? And especially as we talk about this conversation today. I mean, discussing how women of color really show up in our idea of being sexual and sensuality. And for me, when I pull up Glamour, that word, that word really, it comes from a couple of spaces. One being that I was made a grandmother very early. I was 30, what was I, 34 at the time, or 36 at the time, when my first grandson was born. And I remember feeling into this sense of what I see a grandmother being. And I was definitely anything but. No?
We needed a new word. We
definitely needed a new word. And that brings me to my point, because when we think about grandmas, right, there's this sense of the nurture, being a person, or at that phase of our world where we're the nurturers. You know, normally when I think about my grandmother, and the space of being a grandmother, she had wide hips and a full breast that I would just get to bury myself into. She was that space where, you know, the creature comforts would come in when I was running from whatever trouble I might have been in with my mama. I could run to my grandmother, who I called Dada, and nestle in, and she would protect. And there would always be some wisdom that came out of her words as well. And I think that that's important to bring up, because there's this trope that sits around melanated women, this trope or this idea of the grandma or the mammy, that soft, hard but wise woman that holds up this space of, you know, being beautiful and wonderful and holding that space. But I also know, when I think about my grandmother, she has 12 children. I have 12 aunties and uncles, right? And I remember my grandfather, and I remember now, it's interesting, but they're both passed on into the ancestor realm. Love you both, and I'm going to tell this story, even if it's embarrassing. I remember being about 12, 13, and my grandfather came to stay with us for a couple of days because he had had a falling out with my grandmother. And when I asked the question as to why, what was big about it, was Grandpa said to me, well, she didn't want to give me none. And I was like, at 12, I was like, give you none? What does that mean?
What exactly?
However, I was also a prime. I was reading quite a bit by that point. So it took me a minute or two, maybe an hour, but then I figured out what he meant by don't want to give me none. And by then they were in their 60s. And I bring this front and center because I think it's so important to embrace that we all have these seasons that exist in the way that we sit in our sexuality. That even though she was this woman who I could run to and bury myself in her chest and know that I would get the deep wisdom, he looked at her with that spark in his eye, and he still saw his wife, and he wanted to get him some. And I think it's important, even though he's telling me that, I think it's important to notice those things, to notice that we move into these different phases, but we still at our core and essence hold on to this sense of our sexuality. We are always sensual beings, no matter what element of that stage of our existence that we are in. And as women of color, there's layers to that, because our colonial space doesn't always allow us to sit in that and notice and be revered because we have this sensual or sexual end to us. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm hoping we can maybe dive into a little bit deeper today as we move forward.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing this story so we get like this lived experience from you.
Oh yeah.
What that was like, or what that was like. Yes. And gosh, as you were talking, I'm thinking of my own experience and how I didn't I wasn't exposed to the sensual, sexual, anything, you know, and I see that, like, as you mentioned, colonized, like, yes, I see where that came from. I see where going back, who knows how long, that wouldn't have been safe. That wasn't a safe way to express that, you know, more openly. So I know, like, in my if I think about my mother and aunts and things, like, it was very professional and, you know, like, educated. This was coming from Sri Lanka. This is the way the energy went, and it wasn't like, I can look back at pictures of my mother and it, to me, it looks so glamorous, you know, and also know that she would have been holding, because I know her. I know how she is, you know, and it's just like there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of, you know, so she wouldn't have gotten to really, when I was in Sri Lanka, like, a few years ago, before doing the coaching, I was living there just for like a year, or during it, part of it. And, you know, some of her friends would say, oh, like, she had, you know, suitors or whatever it looked like. But it's just like, I've still never heard anything about any of that. Yeah, it just isn't acceptable, you know, like, for her even to express that. Now she'd just be like, oh, that was, you know, when I was a child or something, you know?
Right? And I resonate with that so deeply, because notice I told the story and it was from my grandfather who mentioned this conversation, right? Yes. He was at my house and you know, in my bathroom, because we had each other own bathrooms and he was in mine. So that's kind of how that happened, right?
Right.
But my grandmother wouldn't have necessarily mentioned that story at that point.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, however, as time moved on, my grandmother did start to open up and actually became an integral part of some of the decisions that I made in how I chose to stand in my sexuality, as well as, and it's interesting, even as we're just having this conversation, I'm actually thinking about, there were pivotal moments actually where she did do that, as well as defining how I chose to be in relationships with the people in my lives. I owe her that because she started to set an example. And I mention it because I think where it is powerful is that our grandparents or the women of that time had to be demure. They had to make certain choices around their sexuality for safety, and especially as we stand in this colonial system. So the grandmother and the grandfather that I'm speaking of, we're of West Indian descent. So we're talking about this small, tiny little island. Like, if you look on the map of Antigua, it's literally like a dot on the map. And there's like 60,000 people that are there. Maybe 40,000 of those are actual Antiguans, right? Wow. So it's a small, tiny space. And I recognize, as I said, my grandmother had those 12 children. And I remember asking her about what that meant. Like, what was that like? You know, wow, you have 12 kids. And I said, you know, not that I don't love all my aunties and uncles, but I remember saying to her, Granny, did you ever think about, you know, strapping it up? Like, Grandpa's pull-out game was pretty weak from what I'm seeing. Pretty weak, man. Like, did you ever think, right?
Right.
I remember mentioning that to her, and her answer always stuck with me because she said, we didn't have access, Kerry. She goes, I didn't have access to birth control. I didn't have access to tell him no. There was no way I could tell him no. If he didn't feel like pulling out, he didn't pull out. And so it went.
Right.
And that to me is why this work that we do now is so powerful.
Yes.
Because we now have the opportunity to say, we gonna strap up our damn selves. We don't gotta wait for no man to do that for us. We have the opportunity to decide to just say no. And it didn't mean the difference between eating or not. Do you know?
Yeah.
My grandfather, I love him to death, but he was definitely, you know that song, Papa was a rolling stone, right? So my grandparents have 11 children together, but my grandfather has 16 children.
Yes.
I got some other aunties and uncles.
Yeah.
And they are all kind of in the same age range. They weren't before, and there was no after my grandmother. They kind of all happened in between.
Right.
One of them is before. And what is interesting about that was when I asked my grandmother, like, it was tough. You know, there are some stories of her and the other, we call her like auntie, but the other auntie, which was his other woman, having some kickoff fights.
Yes.
Like she was like that. She didn't take nothing, right?
Right.
So they had some things.
Yeah.
And I asked her, why didn't you ever leave him? And for her, she couldn't, because she was like, he paid the bills. He was feeding everybody. And so again, I bring it back to that the existence of the way we have had to be as women and how that has shaped the autonomy we've had around our sexuality is shifting in this moment.
Yes.
Because we're talking 1940s and 50s.
Yep.
And the choices that she had to make to sustain herself and her children. And I stand on that ground, because if she had not made those choices, I would not exist in the way that I do today. Right. So the legacy and the greatness of those choices are real. But it also brings me back to how we now have the opportunity, because I recognize that she has moments where it was painful for her to be in that space, right?
Yeah.
We now have the opportunity to offer a space of healing in the work and in recognizing the opportunities we have in the now. And so I think it's very important to bring that acknowledgement into play. And so as you were speaking about, Sonali, the sense of almost being sexless in it, you know, where we don't acknowledge, but yet these decisions, the choices of how we have been not necessarily autonomous in our body has shown up generationally for us as women. I think that it's important that now that we do have some space and some safety to do some of that work, to really sit in what it is we want to define and acknowledge that there even is some challenges, in particular as women of color. And so I would love for us to talk a little bit about that too.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, as you were talking on this last piece that just felt so potent to me, it reminds me of this idea of sensual sovereignty that, you know, that I wanted to do, to breathe life into, is how I was thinking of it with having conversations. So thank you again for being here in that. It came, our teacher, Layla Martin, who that's how we met, she was doing something. She wanted people to give, she was inviting any of us, you know, out there to give names to something about like, I think her vision was really like ending sexual trauma, ending sexual abuse in 3 generations or something like that. Um, and this idea came through then, which was this idea of her sacred ground, a reclamation of sensual sovereignty. And so it came then, and then I ended up anyway using it more for my own work eventually, I guess.
I love it though, because you know what it was is that to me is taking the inspiration. Layla Martin is a phenom. We know that I know both of us, we bow down because we couldn't have been here without her bringing the impetus for this platform. Right. But what I recognized is that to end the trauma, we as particular in our range as women of color have to even acknowledge that the trauma is there and that it's layered.
Yes.
That for our instances, not only does it come from that space of, yes, we need to end it, but we also have to then take a look at how this colonized way of being has created the intersectionalities or the silos that we have had to create to be able to just be in survival, let alone the connection into this divineness or this sense of sexual sovereignty. And for us in particular, what I mean by this is that we have been, especially I can speak from the space of being a Black woman. For many, many generations, Black women weren't even seen as anything but chattel. We were 3/5 of a human being in the United States, and all over the world, we have still been seen as less than. Yes. And so when you are not even allowed, the Black body was not even allowed autonomy just from its mere existence. And further to that, it was used as a place for breeding or as a place for just the pleasure of others. There are layers that show up in the way that we are impacted and stand. I think about often, you know, if I was a direct, and I am a direct descendant of slavery, and in particular in the West Indies, where it was very brutal. They were saying, I was just reading a statistic recently, that the average lifespan of a slave that was imported to the West Indies was actually only 5 to 7 years. And so many slaves ended up in the West Indies, and there was no turnaround. 93% of all slaves died. So even the fact that I exist under those odds are incredible. But I could only imagine what it would be if you had a child and you were trying to continue that legacy. You would want to suppress that child's sexuality, that young person's sexuality, because you know that that child, you know, is an objectified being at the best, and then could be used for breeding, or used for breeding, whether you are male or female, used for breeding at the worst. And what we don't talk often about is how that kind of sexuality sits in our DNA. That kind of trauma and literally sits in our DNA, and it would affect the way that your mother or their mother would have, you know, related to them. And we then would learn from that space and then come into another being, right? And so when we talk about that disconnection, I think it's important to mention where that comes from. And then recognizing that we can now equip ourselves with some tools to break through that space of that disconnection. Take a minute to breathe that in.
Need to pause here.
Right?
So
take a minute to breathe it in.
That aspect of survival
Mhm.
And as you pointed out, you being here, a virtual miracle, given the odds, right? Um, and then as a miracle, being, being here, yes, I mean, yes, that's natural. That's survival, that protectiveness that that we can hold as mothers, that would naturally, it would be they're suppressing their own sexuality, and then for sure anyone that they've given birth to, it's like suppress, like stay alive, don't draw attention to this, don't become one of the statistics. This was about living and surviving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let's also just kind of add to the layers. If we add to the layer around now, when we were colonialized, we were brought into a Euro-Christian understanding that would have taken us from some of what might have been our natural indigenous understandings of our own expressions of sexuality. Those spaces would have been suppressed in the understandings of our beings and knowings. And so that space as well added to the level to which this, colonial mind fuck, excuse my French, I pardon my French, I hope that we don't mind that, but this colonial mind fuck has been brought into our being. Yeah. And when we have adopted and shifted into some of those spaces, some of those tenements that did not serve, and actually offered the space where we would become ashamed of our bodies, where we were told that we must cover in ways, where our gods and goddesses, who many times we had different languaging for sex and sexuality. Take, for example, the Karma Sutra, and really understanding the expressions of sexuality, or even using the word yoni and understanding, when we break down even the word yoni, which is another word for a woman's female sexual parts, for the vulva, and that opening, it's known as the sacred place. And so that tells us that when we come from our original understandings, there was a real depth that somehow got lost, or we moved away from, because I don't believe it's lost, because if the traumas can imprint in the DNA, so does the memory of the truth of who we are. That's also in our DNA. And it's just for us to tap back into the moment, to feel into what the ancestors, what we already know, because it's just in the skin, it's in who we are, to be able to feel our safety and express in our now. And so that's the next piece of it for me, is to offer in my work and in the work we're now doing, Sonali, the safety for us to reach back and move forward what we know to be our truth. And I mentioned that because the other day I was working with a dear sister of mine, and we were doing some work around the Yoruba the Yoruba God X, I think is actually the perfect word for the god Olokun. Olokun is a Yoruba god. And if we were to bring back the knowledge and understanding, Olokun was actually a they. They were intersexed. They were both masculine and feminine energy embodied. And when the Christian missionaries got to the space, they chose to move the sex over to being a masculine entity. And it's interesting because very few of us know that these are the happenings. And once we open up to these understandings, what happens is that we can start to claim back our expressions of ourselves in a very powerful way. Right?
Definitely. Oh, Yes, it speaks to that, what I was thinking this whole time, what's come up already, but that reclamation.
Yeah.
Because it's not something new.
No.
It's not something, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. It isn't really new. It's about us spending the time with the breath. I think that breath is such a powerful place to ground. One, it's a powerful place for us to remember, because when we go into breath, we center, we go within, and our breath is eternal.
Yeah.
It's a voluntary thing that we just do, and we've always done. Every human does this, whether you're present now or you existed before. The breath is that power. And when we center in and use breath as a way to bring us in, we can listen to the divineness of what is happening in our body. And we can listen to the divineness of our pussies, which is where for women, and especially women of melanation, women we are the melanated majority, by the way.
Right.
When we look at the world stage, we get this chance to offer ourselves this moment of listening. We can really hear what our pussies want. And then we can move from there to start to heal. We can start from there to heal. I'm just looking at the chat, and I'm seeing,
you're getting lots of, I've been liking them, but yes.
Right. Thank you guys for bringing that in. I'm loving all of the comments, and yes, I'm saying, Maria, you're saying, what a powerful conversation. Thank you, Jyoti. It feels like such a sacred sacrifice to us to bring this powerful sovereign space. I love it. It is important that we do talk about these conversations, that we start to figure out what sensuality and sexuality means for us in these melanated bodies. And that's a piece that I'm going to offer. And if you guys want to throw into the chat, what does sensuality mean for you? If you want to throw it out, I want to hear it and we can talk about it. I think it's so powerful that we do talk about it from an individual space, because also that's the other part of this, Sonali. You know, I think if we look at it from now a modern perspective, you know, very much of how we as brown and Black folk, Black women in particular, have shown up is at extremes. So the system that we live in, as well as the patriarchal space, has either created, as I said, the idea of the grandmommy or the mammy, and or we've got this other side of it where we are what you would use the trope called the Jezebel, or this hyper-sexualized way of being. So, you know, I ain't mad at a little Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. You know, I love me some of them. But when we only have two sides of this representation, where we don't necessarily, as Black people in particular, Black women, don't seem to exist in any other means or any other framework, there becomes a challenge in that we show up with no face at all. And once again, this idea of being sovereign, this idea of being able to own our sexuality is hindered when we really take it from that space. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that's one of the reasons why, for me, Glamour stepped up, right? That's why I wanted to create that, because I am a woman, I think of a certain refinery and age. I am almost 50, I'm 49 this year. And yet I am just as sensual and as sexual as I was, and dare I say, probably even more, because now I know what I'm doing, you know? Now I know what I'm doing. you know, that I might have been in my 20s. But it looks different. It feels different.
Yes, it does.
Right? There's an essence to the way that I show up. There's a deepness in the way that I feel and move and express my sexuality that more nuanced maybe than what it might have been at that phase. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that one way isn't every way, isn't always, and that we can now be in expression of that sexuality. And it's all right. Giving ourselves the permission, I think, is a piece of this. Giving ourselves the permission to be able to finally say, hey, what is it that I like?
Right.
What does my pussy feel like? What does she want? And having those conversations. And yes, I mean conversations with that part of who we are. I think that it's so important that we have those things happening in our space. I'm noticing Jyoti put in the chat again, it feels like a reconnection of union of mind, body, and spirit. And I love that, Maria, too, that yes, it puts women in a box and it takes away our freedom to be. Not seeing the thickness, not seeing the thick 50-year-old South Asian goddess energy out there, right? And I noticed the hand is up, and it's so true, right? You know, it's acknowledging that sexuality is very much a part of our being. And it's also a part of the wellness work that we do. You know, when we talk about meditation, and we talk about self-care and we go get our nails done or we go get our hair done, very few times do we go that other mile, that other nth, where we go in and say, you know what? I'm going to self-pleasure because it just feels good. And I think about that often, you know, that when we talk about self-pleasure, it becomes this space where we all go, ooh, you know, if we do actually even self-pleasure, one, we're not talking about it. And right? Right? It's not, people who know me, yeah, we talk about it. But, you know, it's not something that we would just see as a part of a practice, of a part of our meditative space.
Right.
And I just want to offer out there that our sexual being is the most beautiful space of pleasure that we can come from. So, you know, that same feeling you get when we do get, you know, when your hairdresser gets your hair done and it's on point and you know that it's righteous. It is the same feeling that you get to give yourself when you give that moment of pleasure. And I would offer that not only does it allow us that good feeling, it actually, because there's also the biological stuff that comes with it, getting all the release of those great endorphins. But it also allows us this opportunity to connect back in. It's this opportunity to connect into our heart and our souls and really feel our goodness at a very fundamental level. And the other piece to that is that it's also when we give ourselves the permission to feel the pleasure, it's also the space to heal.
Yes, Maria wrote there, it's healing. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Snapping at that one, Maria. It is healing. It is that. And I, not just for us, but I often self-pleasure because I know my grandmother may not have had the time to do that. I don't know about my mother, but I know my grandmother may not have had the time to do that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I think to myself that we are finally a generation that can step out. And in fact, I feel almost an obligation to do the healing work because there's something to be said about that when we come into this reality and we have this opportunity to heal, we're not just healing ourselves, we're actually healing for generations.
That's right.
We're 7 generations behind us and 7 generations moving forward. And so I see it as not just healing work for me. This is an opportunity to literally change my line and offer true sovereignty moving forward.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Really love that, Kerry. And I'm thinking about with what you've been sharing, it's like it is right now in the present with our breath, with our sensations, with our self-pleasuring, that we have some space to connect in a way that our mothers, grandmother, going all the way back, they didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
Too much with survival. There's too much with, no, that wasn't an option. But now it's like, yes, it's for our own pleasure. And it's so, we can see it as a responsibility, if we will, perhaps, to heal our lineage. We can in this moment.
Absolutely. Like when you say those words about healing the lineage, I feel the chills. And the ancestors for me are just gathering, because I think, you know, a part of some of how we can come back and really, you know, savor this space in time, and especially with all of the things that may be happening in the world, because I think we all sense that there is something really shifting in this universe, is tapping into our goodness, tapping into this space of what can we do. And you are still in this beautiful vessel that has been afforded to you as we relate in the world. And this vessel can offer a unique space to transmute and transmit positive energy. And so as we feel through, because it is new, it is really a new space as well, right? To be able to have conversations like this, that I would offer to us, that we start small. And if we have a moment, I think it's powerful for us to maybe just give some tips, Sonali, because you do this often, where we give and hold space for how we can do it, right? How do we start to open up and listen to Pussy? What are your thoughts on how we do it? Let's give some tips, Sonali. Where do you think we begin?
Well, I think we begin with an intention, usually, you know, right? Like we start somewhere where we just have this idea, we have this intention of I want to explore this relationship. It's to our own body, to our pussy, to our body. You know, that as we've been saying, that before us, generations before us, it really wasn't a thing, and it was suppressed. It was only for like procreation of, you know, like it just wasn't a thing to actually connect to our body and to explore any of that and to experience what's there. And it might not feel like pleasure, right? Initially. I think that's an important part of it. But as you were already mentioning about transmuting this, transmuting trauma, transmuting what's happened for generations, we have to acknowledge that as we start to open up, it can feel, I mean, as I say, it can feel a little like Pandora's box, right? Like we're just, what is there? To know that it's not just our stuff, right? It's the stuff that's been held down and passed down for generations, that once we start to open this, oh, I can have this relationship or I can have this connection, we don't know what's there. So I say we start with an intention. And
Absolutely.
like you said before, though, the breath, the breath, and just like that leaning into what would feel good right now.
Mm-hmm.
But this simple,
Taking
right?
simple. And I love that. I love how you brought that forward. This idea of it being simple. Because what I believe the journey is to that sense of being and standing in our sexuality and our sensuality in that way that it becomes sovereign is to take these baby steps. Because to me, once women and women of color in particular claim back their pussies in that kind of real way, we are going to blow up the world. It's going to be like pow from the pussy, just pow from the pussy. That is going to be what it is.
And for this melanated majority, as you brought us,
right?
That, like, yeah. And can you imagine why this was all suppressed? There's some potency there that a lot of people don't want to see, witness, experience, none of that. So it's up to us to really start where we are, and whoever's on here with us, like it is up to us.
Absolutely.
You know,
it is truly, I love that, Maria. Time to claim our pussy power, because I think that is it fundamentally. You mentioned something that I want to reiterate because it's real. There was a reason why it was suppressed. There is this shift happening in this universe, and I do believe that it is going to come from the power of the woman. And the one way for us to fundamentally tap into this divineness is to get into connection with your sensual sense, with your pussy power, because once you emanate from that place, when you are ready to feel, it changes the energetic vibration of who you are. People notice you in different ways. You feel different because you're like, yeah, I can give myself that good at any time. It is such a powerful way to be like the battery. It literally can become like a battery of your goodness and help infuse you as you stand up. And so for me, I would also offer in that, as you set intention being the first one, and as you move through, intention can look like, today I am going to use my pussy power to heal. I'm feeling a little depressed, maybe. I'm feeling a little sad. I'm going to use my pussy power to heal a wound that maybe I'm not even aware of. But today, that's where the pleasure is going to come from. Or maybe it'll look like, I need to clear out an ex-lover. I just broke up with icky dude or icky her. And I'm now going to clear her out. So I'm going to pleasure to send her away or send him away. You have the power to intentionally put in what you want and use the breath to bring you into the space of your body, to allow you that moment to quiet and center. And then I would offer to simply touch, and not touch necessarily for pleasure, but to touch to be an awareness of your body as you're moving into the beginning stages of feeling into this space. And what I mean by that is there's nothing wrong. I very often always start my clients out with learning to touch yourself and your body, giving yourself this hug. As women as well, a part of where we are powerful is we are constantly in a nurture position. So we're always giving out and nurturing others with love.
Yes.
But there's something very powerful when you take a minute to refocus back in and offer that simple hug that you may have given to a best friend or to a child or to somebody around you back to yourself. There's something pivotal about centering that kind of energy. And what you find is you like this hug, so it might move down a little. Right? And as it continues to move down, well, things start to happen. And that is so okay.
Yes.
You are in the process of that as well. It doesn't always mean that we got to have a big bang ending,
Right.
because that is actually a colonial understanding as well. It's not necessarily our understanding.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love all of that. And it reminded me of two things. One is that getting into the energy of receiving, so we can actually give to ourselves and receive, right? We can receive from ourselves. And also this beauty and this like exquisite space that we can create with no expectations. Like where we can just leave that at the door, because you're right, that's so colonial. And that's how we're so wired, like, oh, there's got to be something. But no, there can just be exploration. There can just be giving, receiving, leaning in, exploring, surrendering, right?
Right? That makes me just want to move and shift into my body, right? And it really does offer a gentleness, right? Because a lot of the times because of that space that, women, most of us come from it naturally. So I also want to honor it, this sense or idea that we give, right? But there's an implicit understanding when we think about sexuality, or there's an implicit bias that comes with that idea of the nurture from our sexual space, where we see ourselves as objectified in it. So what I mean by that is that we see ourselves as having to give pleasure to others, but we very often don't take into effect this idea of what receiving means. That we can also receive back the pleasure, and we can center ourselves in this receiving of the pleasure. And so it becomes a very different expectation and experience when we recognize the goddess or the god X energy that's within us and experience our sexuality from that space. No, and I think that begins with knowing your own pleasure. So that's why that touch exercise, that breathing exercise, knowing what your body likes becomes a very useful tool as we work into healing, and even how we are in partnership with others. I think about that. I realized I became very powerful when I started to take control of my sexual ship. And what I mean by that was, when you're younger, when I was younger, well, actually, I kind of knocked down the thing. Sorry, guys. I don't even
power in this.
Right? The power of the pussy. I'm getting too excited. When I was younger, actually, probably not necessarily my full truth, but I think I used to be a little bit more anxious about giving, right? Or receiving. Sorry, it was more about making sure that my partner was good, right? And I think about that for actually the very first time I had sex. I remember this. I was 15. You know who you are. We were intimate, and neither one of us really knew what we were doing. But I remember I had read a lot, and it totally was not like the Harlequin romances that I read. And I just ended up a little bit sore and just a whole lot disappointed, right? But not that it wasn't beautiful, because you know who you are. Not that it wasn't a beautiful experience, but it was the first indication to me that I was quiet during the whole experience, right? We didn't say much. He was shy. I was shy.
Yeah.
We were rumpling around. And it was I remember leaving Sonali and going, next time we do this, I'm going to ask for some things. I'm going to go read my book. I'm going to go read about this because this was just not a great time. Wasn't a great time. Really upset, right? And I'm like, there can't be anybody writing about this and it stuck like this. It can't be. And so for me, I realized then how important it was for me to start to ask for what I want. And before I could ask, I had to do the research. And that is when I really did start to learn my body. And it was interesting because the next couple of times we got together, it was a different experience because I was like, he was intimidated because I was like, look, dude, nah, you're not touching that right. You got to shift because no. I could direct how that went. And it was considerably better for both of us. And so that empowering of ourselves does create an importance. And I recognize that for women of color, that's a hard one for us, right? It's been a challenge, but I'm offering that now is our time, that we can give ourselves the permission, that we can push back. If you want to stand up against the system, because we all know that there are some things that need shifting, I think that one of the places we can begin is with our pussies. Power up your pussy. It is a powerful tool against the patriarchy.
That's right. That is huge.
Right?
Yes. It's a powerful tool against oppression of all kinds.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh. Wow, I'm enjoying this so much. We've been going for almost an hour.
Wow.
Amazing.
I agree. I agree. Is there any comments or thoughts that are out there? Anybody have anything they want to offer into the conversation? Any thoughts that you may have, Sonali? I'm just feeling so inspired, I think.
Yes, I do want to note that Maria had pointed out earlier, we were talking about this self-pleasuring, this giving, receiving, and she said that sometimes there's crying, and that is what creates the healing, the bliss, the vulnerable connection. That's beautiful. Yeah.
I love that. And it's so real. I think sometimes, just to bring into that space, I want to acknowledge that our pussies have its own language. Our pussies speak. Our pussies are the foundation. Our wombs are our foundations, our womb identified even. All of that space is a channel and a conduit for this space of our humanness, for this space of our connection in. And so you will find that sometimes you're going to get the tears. And especially because it is a channel, those tears may not even be all your own tears, but might be the tears of those who have come before you. And I love that we can recognize and honor it and allow ourselves to be in these body spaces, allow our wombs to come through. And I see Jyoti, I see you, Karen. Hey, Karen Carrington, shouting you out. And I love, Jyoti, that you would say, what do you suggest to women who are disassociated from their body? How do we reconnect? Ooh, Sonali, I'm going to leave that one with you.
Okay. Oh, what a beautiful question. I think one thing that's comes to me from working with a lot of women and even with my own body is to acknowledge that numbness is a sensation, right? So it doesn't feel like it, it doesn't feel good, perhaps, sometimes, and it doesn't feel like what we think of as a sensation, but it actually is. And once we can kind of acknowledge that even what we're not feeling is sensation, is there's something like the body is infinitely wise and protective, right? And so the body will, if something has happened, and again, it could be in our lifetimes, or as we're talking about here, like it can be something that shows up in our body that's actually not even fully ours, like in something that we've experienced, that disconnection is protective. The numbness is protective. All of that form is, as we've been talking about in this hour together, it's like there was survival. There was no expression that was safe for sexuality, for sensuality, unless perhaps just in the bedroom. And even then, it wasn't totally safe. It was really, there was a lot of conditioning around it, rules around it. So it wasn't like it was rarely, I would imagine, a safe place for a woman to feel expressed, to feel sexually expressed. So as we've been talking about, like in our bodies, in this time here and now, we are holding things from our own lifetime and perhaps from our other generations, from our lineage. So we start to open up that like intention of, oh, I want to connect to pussy. I want to connect to my body. And what we might get is numbness initially, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like our, can we be curious? Can we delve a little bit more? Can we show up repeatedly? Like any relationship, just keep showing up, showing up like I'm here now for whatever is present now. And then slowly that can shift. That numbness can shift when there's safety and when there's space.
For the shift.
This is what's come for the shift. What do you think, Kerry? This is what came.
I'm actually along your lines, and what really came for me, just in addition to that, is like just to offer out. I often tell my clients that when we are starting to work into this idea of connecting back into the body, the self and a self-pleasure practice as the mechanism to be used for that, that it does start with the acknowledgement of that numbness. So I'm in complete agreement. Numbness is a sensation. And I often offer to my clients to use what I call the yes, the no, or the maybe so. And what I mean by that is as you are moving through a practice, start with like 10 minutes a day of intentional time. And maybe the intention is, I want to see if I can feel through this numbness, right? And what I mean by that is as you are moving through, I say to myself to ask I ask my pussy, is this a real yes? Are we like, yes, I can feel in, I'm going to let you in. I'm moving in there now. Or is it, not today. I don't want it at all. Or could it potentially be that secondary space where I can maybe do 3 minutes today. We can talk for 3 minutes and then let me alone. That's where it's the yes, the no, or the maybe so. It's okay to allow pussy, taking that moment to listen in earnest. Oh, did you lose me for a minute? Are we good?
Second, yeah, I was like, it's okay to allow pussy. That's where you were.
Right? I said it's okay to allow pussy to dictate what she wants. Yeah, well, did you get me again? I think we might be losing time. That might be what happened. So doesn't it shut down after an hour?
No, I have gone past an hour before, once.
Okay, well, you know what? Let's go past the hour. Hopefully we'll be good. I was just I'll repeat it quickly so that we can end the thought. But hopefully what will happen is that once pussy knows that they're being heard and listened to, because a lot of the times it's about that numbness as the protection.
Yes.
And it's the first place we go to when we aren't feeling safe.
Yes.
And so once we listen and allow pussy what she needs in those moments,
yes,
what will happen is she begins to respond because you're building the level of safety into it. And so I agree completely with you, Sonali. It begins with the acknowledgement that there is that sense of numbness and that it's okay to be there. It's okay. Numbness is a beginning.
Yes.
Numbness is information.
Yes.
Numbness lets us know that we just got to keep moving because eventually she will open up and respond.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for that. I think it is so important to acknowledge the numbness as a beginning, as a sensation, as information, and because people get stuck, they get stuck there, and they're like done, right? And it's like, no, this is the beginning. Hang in there, you know.
Sure. Sonali, I just want to acknowledge everybody who just joined. I just noticed Intuitive and Thrive just joined us. GGZ 2002 just joined us. I really appreciate you guys coming into the conversation. And if you didn't realize, we're talking about sexual sovereignty. I love that I fell in love with, I meant to mention this to you, Sonali, the Burn the Box series. I love that so much. I really do. I think it's powerful that we have these conversations about how can we, as women of color, come into our sensual sense and are acknowledging that we deserve to be sovereign. And that's, I think, the final piece for me is that acknowledgement and the right to give ourselves the permission to be in the sovereignty of our sexuality. That we are I believe the generation and the time is now where we can start to not just do the healing work, but to step into our power around our sexuality and wield it, not just own it, wield it, because it is a tool. It is like, you know, you've got the fairy pussy. It is just as powerful as any magic wand, and it is yours to wield. And I love that. I love that we can stand at this time and speak.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's a comment here. I can't read all of it. I feel like I used to be so much more connected to my body in youth. I'm not sure where this dissociation started in adulthood.
I hear you. I'm just holding some space for that, Dana, and I'm witnessing you. And I want to just acknowledge that. I think for many of us, Queen, many of us move through that space. I think what happens is life happens.
That's right. That's what I was thinking too. I'm like, yeah, we go from childhood to adulthood, and there's a lot that happens with our bodies, with our sexuality.
Right? And just the very being of being a woman and having to stand up and show up and wear all the different faces and hats that we do sometimes takes us away from that space of being in nurture, right? Being nurturing ourselves, because we nurture everybody else, but that idea of nurturing ourselves. So I'm honoring you. I really want to hold that space, because with the knowledge that you might have pulled back from it is also now new information and awareness that you can also tap back into it. That you can put yourself front and center and let your pussy know right now, right? You can choose her at any time. and that's where maybe it should begin, or you can think about it, feeling into that space. What resonates with her right now?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So beautifully said. Oh, Kerry, is there something, oh, you kind of said before, but is there something else, anything else that you want to share with us in this space? Does it feel complete?
I feel complete.
You feel complete.
I feel complete. I think if anybody else has any comments they want to put in, but I just want to offer out as my final thought is that you are powerful. If you showed up on this call, there was a reason and a purpose for you. And I am just going to offer and challenge you to set your intentionality, to take a listen to what your pussy wants.
Mm-hmm.
And further to that, to give pussy the opportunity to wield her space and become sovereign. Your right, your pussy is your birthright, and that is your space of your power.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
To that.
Right.
Kerry, tell us where people can find you, your work, what's lighting you up that you're offering these days.
You can find me at Kerry Sutra on Instagram. I am relaunching, or now going to be really paying attention. If you really want to find me, I'm actually going to be on YouTube under Kerry Sutra TV. All of my good and tips are going to be there, and keep a lookout and listen out, subscribe, like, and hit the bell, as we all say. Please follow me on my YouTube channel, Kerry Sutra TV. I have an offering out right now. It's called Just a Touch of Love and Touch, which is a mini program. It's a little juicy taste that allows you to invite self-pleasure into your life. And it walks you through the experience of what self-pleasure can look like over a 3-day journey of that truth. So if you're interested, you can find it at on my website, or even just look under Instagram. You can click in and that. Yeah.
Yes, that sounds amazing. I will be subscribing to your channel for sure.
Love that. Thank you.
Just really honoring you. Thank you so much for being here. I feel like this is coming full circle of whatever, 3.5 years, whatever it is, of starting on this part of a path. Of course, life is its own path, but it's just so good to be on this journey with you. And I really appreciate where you invited this conversation to go. I want to acknowledge that in most of the other, this is, what number did I tell you? 9. I think this is the 9th conversation I'm having with this sensual sovereignty, burn the box. And they've all been so amazing. But I did just kind of keep most of them just so open. And I just appreciate, after I reached out more recently, that you said, how about we talk about this?
Yeah.
And I am so grateful for that. And you have so much wisdom. I really appreciate you.
Well, as I said, I could not be here without you, Queen. Unequivocally know that with all that I am. I could not have existed without you. Your face was the deciding factor for me. And so I too just love, honor, appreciate, I'm grateful that we get to stand and walk this walk. And I hope this is just the beginning of many more beginnings for us as we move forward, right? I ain't playing. We're going to do this. We're going to continue to do this.
On your YouTube, and we just see what else opens.
Stay tuned. This is only a beginning.
I know. Oh, thank you for sure. Got that. It's almost like I do want to receive, and I also am like, oh no, like it was just you came in with your power, and then the journey has been just amplification, you know.
Yep. We're gonna roll it out. This is the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm on a mission. I really think that this is coming to light for me, where I want to bring our melanated faces front and center. I want us to be able to be that example that we can be this sexually empowered, and it can look like all different faces, shapes, sizes, and colors. So that's where we're at. And we're going to do this, my dear. You and I.
Yes, amazing.
Yes, yes. Till next time.
Until next time. Thank you.
Bye.